Thank you, Deng Fong, Mr. Chua Tianpo, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. A few weeks ago, I was invited by two old colleagues, former State Councillor for Foreign Affairs, Tsai Ping-kuo, and former China Vice Minister for Education, Zhang Xingsheng, who many years ago was mayor of Suzhou when we embarked on our project to build the industrial township there. They invited me to attend the 生态文明贵阳国际论坛, and I'm now on the international advisory panel chaired by Tsai Ping-kuo. On the first day, I skipped many sessions to do a quick trip to Zuni, because I always wanted to visit Zuni. Its historical importance when Mao Zedong became leader of the Chinese Communist Party. It was utterly fascinating. And in the old building, they gave me special permission to go upstairs to see the rooms occupied by Yang Sang-kun and many of the other leaders who were there. A meeting which eventually saw the Chinese Communist Party investigate Bogu and Li De, this German Kuomintang military advisor, Otto Braun. And after that, Zhou Enlai accepted Mao Zedong's leadership. Then there were maps showing the travails of the Long March. Many times, the Red Army having to cross the river because Chiang Kai-shek was determined to exterminate them, chasing them all the way to Sichuan, to Qinghai, and then up, finally finding refuge in Yan'an. I remember many years ago, when I was visiting Wu Shuiguang's development in Xi'an, we saw Yang Guifei's bathing area, and then the spot where the Xi'an incident took place. How Chiang Kai-shek tried to escape, leaving behind his denture, and finally caught cowering in a corner. Of course, he never forgave Marshal Zhang Shuiliang. Then about 3 months ago, I was in Taiwan, and former Vice President Xiao Wangchang invited me to accompany him to Jingmen for some ceremony because he knew I was interested in building my logistics facility there. I visited Chiang Kai-shek's command post and the tunnel network. Jingmen Island may be quarter to a fifth the size of Singapore. At its peak, 1 million soldiers. Of course, they had behind them the 7th Fleet and American advisors. And the Americans were threatening China, if you take Jingmen, we may use nuclear weapons against you. Jiang Jingguo went there, and as a mark of respect to his father, would not occupy his father's command post, but had his own little command post on the side. I was reflecting on this titanic civil war. When in Chinese history they say 打天下, you are fighting across a continent. If you die, you and your supporters are finished. If you succeed, you unify a continental, a civilizational nation, which then becomes enormously productive once there is peace. So Chiang Kai-shek was fighting this civil war. And in Taiwan, there was a minor revolt, the infamous 228 incident. You can imagine today, the Taiwanese some of them are very angry with Chiang Kai-shek for ordering the crackdown. I'm not trying to justify Chiang Kai-shek, but you imagine the state of mind he was in, fighting this enormous civil war, and in Taiwan an uprising, so he must have told his subordinate, smash it. So troops left Fujian and went there and just slaughtered. And for years, no one allowed to talk about it, kept inside. Without an understanding of this history, it's very difficult to understand China today and why it must act in a particular way. We are so used to creating mental constructs, mental models of economic theory, of political systems, that we think that what applies to a small, medium-sized country should apply to China. So when they say, oh, China has intervened in the stock market, this has created moral hazard, that's true. It's like the Greenspan put. But why are they doing it? I think in many areas, China has got to find its own way into the future. And it will create patterns which theorists and academicians have not yet quite fully understood. I mean, to quote Mao Zedong, practice leads theory. Things happen first. People are reacting to necessities. Later on, history will catch up, but it will take time. You take, say, China's financial system. In recent months, great changes in foreign exchange flows, in the development of the capital markets. Because unless China liberalizes its capital markets, there'll be a persistent misallocation of the high savings accumulated by Chinese households. Funneled to state-owned banks, funneled to state-owned enterprises, wasted, distorting the system. So they've got to liberalize. But will they liberalize at Singapore or Europe or America? They cannot. Because it's such a vast country, a fifth of humanity. It is a universe unto itself. And if the problems get out of hand, the cycles are so long. As they say in 三国演义, 分就必合，合就必分. Once it breaks up, the consequences are enormous, lasting many lifetimes. They are now trying, I do not know whether they'll succeed, to create two different pools of renminbi. The big ocean within China itself. And then another pool outside China, a small fraction of what's inside China, not seeking to displace the US dollar. Maybe now 3%, 4%, maybe one day becoming 10, 20%. But still a fraction of the renminbi within China. Trying to create two separate pools of renminbi creates a lot of problems because of arbitrage. And when they intervene, as they did in Shanghai recently, it will create a lot of problems. But it is an acute problem. Solve this first, manage the side effects later, and learn from it. That is the approach they are taking. So when I read reports, oh, China is going to liberalize its capital markets. Yes, but only up to a point. Because China cannot afford to let the international financial system, if there is a typhoon there, for it to spread inland and upset its internal organization. If there's a permanent difference in value between these two renminbi reservoirs or oceans, it's a permanent arbitrage opportunity and becomes an ATM machine for those in the financial industry. So China cannot afford to allow that. I think it would be like the barrage they built in Venice. You know, in Venice, because of the fear of flooding, they built this enormous multi-billion-dollar barrage. If suddenly the Mediterranean rises, the barrage goes up to hold back the water until it recedes, then it comes down again. China will create barrages so that in an emergency, if there's foreign manipulation, if there's a crisis outside, they can insulate themselves from what's outside. No one knows exactly how this will work. They are experimenting. Reacting to crisis, learning from crisis, adjusting. As Deng Xiaoping said, crossing the river by filling the stones beneath, stone by stone, but maintaining a sense of direction. There's a parallel situation in cyberspace. China today has probably the most advanced cyberspace in the world in terms of the liveliness of its internet, in terms of its payment system, all kinds of new innovations. If we read international media, we read only about censorship. Is there censorship? Yes, of course there's censorship. But that's not the whole story. The whole story is a decision taken in the 90s to open up cyberspace. And there's a new innovation. First, like in the financial system, there is a Chinese internet universe, there's an external internet universe, and in between, control through portals. If there are leakages through VPNs, it's okay, they allow it, but the moment the VPN becomes too big, they clamp it down. So if you talk to students in Chinese universities, because I was in Peita for 4 months as a visiting scholar, and the students helped me tunnel out so that I can do my Facebook posting. I could never do it myself, but they helped me. This is a cat and mouse game they play. But that's not interesting. What is interesting is how they are managing cyberspace within China. And it's almost a little like Zhongyi, Chinese medicine. Managing Chinese society holistically. China's problem throughout the centuries is because it is such a vast country, to organize it, you need many layers. And when there are problems in the Xiangcun, it may never go up to Zhongyang. Many of us have seen Zhang Yimou's movie, 秋季打官司. You have a problem on the ground, yes, people are very nice to you, they listen to you, nothing happens. You try to go one level up, yes, they listen to you, they take your complaint, nothing happens. And this is a persistent problem in Chinese society, which is why they invented central inspectors, cutting right through to find out what's happening on the ground and punishing corrupt officials. But it doesn't work because it's such a vast country. But now with big data, with the internet, they are developing a new way of managing social health. Because, let us say there is a village or a small town where bad things are happening, suddenly it will appear in the big data, like a fever, like an inflammation. So when we see a Zhonghui doctor, he'll look at you, look at your eyes, feel your pulse, let me see your tongue, feel your palms, and says, yes, you're out of balance, too cool or too hot, whatever, tiao. China is now using progressively, in an experimental way, the idea of tiao, using cyberspace to monitor the performance of governments at different levels, and when there's a problem, to react to it. Because big data, very often, when you are part of it, you are not aware you're being monitored. You think that you've got it all covered up. No one knows. But it shows up in the internet traffic. Many intelligence agencies in the world, especially the US, they use big data to monitor Islamic websites, terrorism traffic. China is gradually using this to manage a whole country, a vast country. And I'm told by a friend of mine who's in this business that at every level now, they are constantly using polling to monitor the health of society. So in this experiment, they will be able to correct some of the problems of democracy, where leaders become afraid of people because they need the vote. And they're reacting short-term rather than long-term. I give you an example of how feedback, if it's not managed well, can create other problems. Early this year, I think it was just around before Chunjie, this lady in China, Cai Jing, in a very powerful program called 穹顶之下, Inside the Dome, talking about pollution in China and how devastated cities and the countryside are because of mindless economic growth, corrupt officials, bureaucrats who are more worried about how they'll be assessed on economic growth than about air pollution and the health of their people. Within a few weeks, 200 million viewers. Then the Chinese government decided to clamp down. Not because they disagreed with the program, not because they themselves were not committed to it, but because when the reaction is so strong, the reaction makes it difficult for you to solve the problem. This is like treating a human body. If you have a high fever, if the inflammation is so strong, you have to calm the body down first. Then you treat it. And they're getting more and more sophisticated. Initially, it was just by banning certain words. So you type by two, certain words blank out. Now the censorship, the control is much more modulated and subtle. Sometimes it's just by adding friction. So I give you two examples, the financial system and cyberspace, where China is creating, in a very creative way, new patterns that the world has not seen before. The third, which is a topic, which is a formal topic for tonight, is 一带一路, and what this means for China, and what this means for us. It is not a plan. I see some of the explanatory material, they actually draw the old Silk Road, Zhangqian, Xuanzang, and how it goes through this town, that city, Zheng He's voyages. No, this is not the Silk Road. The Silk Road is a flow, a 大潮流. And when it flows according to the resistance. But it flows in a certain direction because of the energy at the source. China is not doing this out of charity to help its neighbors. China is doing this for itself because no other country has this history and this homogeneity. So once the country is united and the economy grows, the growth doesn't stop at the boundary. Naturally, the growth goes beyond. And they've got to correct internal imbalances. The short-term imbalances, of course, spare capacity for steel, for cement, for so many things, which can easily be used to build connectivity. There's also the inland areas, which are following behind the coastal region, and factories moving from coastal China to Southeast Asia, creating this second wave of growth in ASEAN. They want some of it to flow inland, because if it doesn't flow inland, there'll be problems. It's the same problems. Mao Zedong in the 50s talked about the 中国十大矛盾 or something. It's the same thing. Intellectuals, manual workers, inland, coastal areas, heavy industry, light industries, industry services, the same dynamics. They have to create connections to develop the inland areas, which, if you think about it, before the arrival of the European powers, has been Chinese history going back to the earliest times, and which is why this reinvocation of the term the Silk Road. And it is high drama because I've been following closely China's approach, let us say on railroad development. Railroad is only one aspect. I mean, you have highways, airports, ports, optical fibers, power stations, logistics parks, many things. But just railroads. When Lee Kuan Yew passed away, President Nazarbayev from Kazakhstan asked Prime Minister Masimov, who was at the time in Beijing, on his way to Bo'ao, to come to Singapore for the funeral service. So that night I had dinner with him. When he was in Beijing, he signed a slew of agreements with Premier Li Keqiang. 33 agreements, $23 billion. And Premier Li Keqiang told him, we'd rather not have raw material from Kazakhstan. We'd rather have processed goods, manufactured goods. And then Premier Li told Prime Minister Masimov, Kazakhstan is the most important country for Itai. And this is only the first installment. 2013, September, Itai, announced by President Xi in Astana. 2013, October, Ilu, President Xi Jinping announced in Jakarta at the DPR. First time a foreign leader addressed the DPR, the Indonesian parliament. I think at that time, we read all these speeches. We did not quite understand the idea behind it. And I'm not sure if at that time, China had a clear plan either, but it was a clear approach that they were going to take. And every time there is a power that is prepared to cooperate, they will move. When there are problems with Vietnam linking up the two routes from Nam Ninh to Herney and Kunming to Herney, they develop alternatives through Laos, through Myanmar. Today, Vietnam decided, better be part of the game. Before Foxconn, Xiaomi, Samsung have invested heavily north of Hanoi. And so the land borders have opened up. And this is one reason why relations between Vietnam and China over the South China Sea will never get too bad, because the stakes are too high. China is now planning railroad connections to every sea around Eurasia. From Kunming, Vientiane, Bangkok, fast train. Kunming, Mandalay, Tsao Piu, Andaman Sea. From Kashgar to the Kunjarab Pass, Islamabad to Gwadar, fast train. Recently signed in Islamabad. Prime Minister Masimov told me that there's already a railroad built by China all the way to the Caspian Sea. And 3 months before our meeting, that is the beginning of the year, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Iran linked up, which means China today has a railroad connection to the Persian Gulf. And with the nuclear peace agreement in Iran, the whole geostrategic picture in that area changes. I think in the business community, watch that space. Many things are going to happen. Saudi Arabia for a long time opposing any settlement, now welcoming it. Russia, because of the tension in the West, they're talking now about a fast train from Beijing to Moscow, 7,000 kilometers, racing across at over 200 kilometers an hour, less than 2 days. The amounts are, I think, $200 billion. Can it be justified? Not by passenger and by rail cargo. It can only be justified if you build a belt of cities in between, through Kazakhstan to Russia. Let us see. From there to the Baltics, to St. Petersburg, to Riga, to Klaipeda. Presidency was in Duisburg, to the North Sea. And my colleague in Spain told me that they even ran a train to Madrid, just to make a point. This is the complete reopening up of Eurasia. What drives it? What drives it is billions of people who cannot join the global market because of bad connections, bad logistics. So if China can pull this off, and many countries want China to succeed because they need it, it's going to change the geo-economic, geo-strategic map of Asia. And this is, as I said, not a plan. It is the flow of movement, because everywhere there'll be problems. The moment the water flows down, it means a hard point. It's got to turn around. Take Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, 2.7 million square kilometers, 1/3 the size of China, but with only 17 million people. Kazakhstan teams up with China. It's like plugging your iPhone into a power station. If you're not careful, well, you get a shock of your life. So every country worries. If I were to depend on China, will I come under China's control? If I plug in, can I unplug? What happens to me? I better diversify. So the more they need China, the more they have to diversify. I wrote this simple piece for an American electronic newspaper. I said, nobody wants China as an enemy, but everybody wants the US as a friend. Everybody wants Japan as a friend. Then they can plug into China feeling more assured. You know, Kazakhstan, they don't just want to be a carpet for people to walk up and down between Europe and China. They want to have their own universities, their own industries, their own contribution to make, so that there are opportunities for the people to learn, to improve, to participate. And here, to me, is the most important aspect of Itai-Ilu. It is not the physical infrastructure, because that money can buy, that anybody can build. It is how human beings interact with one another. President Xi Jinping, before he went to Moscow for the 70th commemoration of the end of the Second World War in Europe, invited by President Putin, he stopped by in Astana to elaborate on Itai with Kazakhstan. So I read it very carefully. He said, let us align our economic policies. In other words, you, Kazakhstan, you have your dreams, you have your Kazakh dream, I have my China dream. Let us align. If my dream becomes your nightmare, how can it be a dream? We all wake up. So let us align our policies. And everywhere, Vietnam, Myanmar, when you're ready, we are ready. You create a network. No exclusivity. I remember Premier Zhu Rongji, year 2000, vividly, in Singapore. At that time, ASEAN still reeling from the financial crisis. He was attending an ASEAN summit meeting. He said, let us have a free trade agreement between ASEAN and China. We did not know how to respond, because at that time, we thought China was an economic threat to ASEAN. A year later, I remember it vividly because the economic ministers were meeting in Hanoi on September 11, 2001. Our handphones were ringing because of what was happening in New York. That night, we agreed to welcome Premier Zhu's proposal on one condition, that there must be an early harvest to give ASEAN an initial advantage. Long Yong-tu told me this later. Chinese negotiators were very tough. When they went up to Zhu Rongji, he said, this is political. Concede. 2002, Phnom Penh, the framework agreement was signed between the leaders of ASEAN and Premier Zhu. And Premier Zhu said, if at the end of 10 years, the agreement is disproportionately in favor of China, let us renegotiate it. I can never imagine the US Trade Representative or the European Trade Commissioner talking in that way. For them, a contract is a contract, a deal is a deal. If you break it, I see you in court. Premier Zhu said, if it's imbalanced after that, we cham xiong again. We talk again. But his second point was even more important. He said China would never seek for itself an exclusive position in Southeast Asia. In other words, yes, we are very close, but you are free to be with the Americans, the Japanese, the Indians, and anybody else. And this is the thinking behind the Silk Road, where, like the internet, the Silk Road is like an internet, It unites us. Whatever your operating system. It can be a Muslim operating system, it can be an Indian operating system, it can be a Chinese operating system. You keep your operating system. We agree to certain protocols, TCP/IP, certain precautions, we link up. And we benefit from linking up. But if you tell me, when I join the internet will mess around with my computer, mess around with my phone, I say, no, thank you. I don't want your cookies, I do not want your interference. This is a very different China trade from that of the 19th century, when the British East India Company came and demanded free trade, and demanded either colonies or concession areas where their laws obtain. In other words, my operating system will enter yours. And I will have compradors, hongs, dealing between my operating system and your people, which was the history of Asia for a long time. But this new Silk Road will operate on a different principle. And this makes it very important. It doesn't mean we don't learn from one another. It doesn't mean that when two systems interact, there are no changes. But it will be slow, it will be by mutual consent, it will be by osmosis, it will be by persuasion, not by force, not by imposition, not as a precondition. I don't think our Western friends are fully aware of the implications. They view it as a threat. You are now making a power move against me, so I oppose the AIIB. The AIIB is only a small part. Capitalized at 50 billion, 100 billion. To build these connections, you need trillions of dollars. You need the World Bank, you need the AIIB, you need ADB, you need many other institutions. Because this is an initiative which, if it succeeds, it's not a Chinese initiative. It'll be an initiative for everybody. Now, I look at the map. I go to India quite often now because of the Nalanda University project. And I dream of the day when the Chinese rail system and the Indian rail system interconnect. I was studying the Pakistani connection. From Kashgar to the Gujarat Pass, about, I think, 350 kilometers. From there down to the Pakistani rail network, another 750 kilometers. So that means that you need an additional link of about 1,100 kilometers. Today, from Kerry to Lhasa, there is this fantastic railroad built on permafrost, 80% over 4,000 meters. I took that train to Lhasa when I was Prime Minister. And from there, they said, this train will go to Shikatse. Along the road to Shikatse, the accompanying Chinese officials said, we're actually only, I think, 200 kilometers from the Natula Pass, which is the border between China and India. And this Chinese official said, we should link up to the Indian rail. This is from a Chinese official. The link between India and China will be a much easier link than between China and Pakistan. The only thing holding it back is politics. But when I follow Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to China, beginning with Xi'an, beginning with a visit to the Daxing Santa, which was a temple a Gujarati monk visited, I think, the 4th or 5th century during the Nampi Tao era to translate sutras from Sanskrit to Chinese. And he donated a Bodhi tree from Bodhi Gaya. And in the afternoon, President Xi Jinping himself escorted Prime Minister Modi through the grounds of the Taiyenta, which was the temple Xuanzang returned to after bringing in the sutras from India. And President Xi told Prime Minister Modi, the great monk traveled from your birthplace to my birthplace, because Xuanzang went to Gujarat too. In other words, the idea of connecting China and India, which is 40% of the world's population, is a possibility. And when I was in India recently talking to a high official, he said, when I mentioned this to him, he said, something to think about if Modi gets a second term. he didn't dismiss it. This is the Asia before us. This is the Asia which our children will inherit. This is an Asia which will benefit the entire world. Thank you.
Future China Global Forum is organized by Business China Singapore in partnership with our sponsors and partners.